Hello everyone. Before we get into today's incredible story, I'd like to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. Hearing from each of you truly makes this community special. Your support keeps Unheard Stories alive. Why this story matters. This isn't just another story about heartbreak. It's about betrayal that cuts so deep, it challenges everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and trust. Imagine having your life planned out, only for it to fall apart when the person you trusted most walks away, only to return years later with shocking revelations. My wife left me under the guise of a casual girls' trip. She vanished without explanation, leaving me with nothing but questions. Years later, she reappeared, holding a baby in her arms. That moment wasn't just a turning point in my life. It was the start of a journey that would test my strength, force me to face my demons, and teach me to rise above the ashes of betrayal. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Unheard Stories. Share your thoughts, reactions, and experiences in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Now, let's dive into this unforgettable journey. To truly understand the heartbreak that unfolded, let me introduce myself, or at least the person I was back then. I was the type of man who believed in building a life on trust, loyalty, and shared dreams. Hardworking and dedicated, I prided myself on being the kind of partner who would move heaven and earth for the person I loved. My life was simple but fulfilling, centered around my career, my passions, and most of all, my wife. At the start of our relationship, everything felt perfect. She wasn't just my wife. She was my best friend, my confidant, the one person I trusted above all else. We shared everything: hopes, fears, dreams of the future. And I genuinely believed we were on the same page. We were married for 4 years, and during that time I thought we were building something solid. We would stay up late planning our future, talking about how we wanted to raise our children, even daydreaming about what their names might be. She would show me baby clothes online, point out baby gadgets, and discuss nursery themes. It was our dream, at least that's what I thought. Looking back now, I realized there were signs, subtle but undeniable, that her commitment wasn't as deep as mine. After a few months of trying to start a family, we went to see a doctor. That was the day everything shifted. The diagnosis was clear. The issue was with me. My infertility shattered our shared dream of having children naturally. First, she seemed supportive. She told me it didn't matter, that we'd figure things out together. But her words felt hollow, like she was saying what she thought I needed to hear. She stopped talking about our future as openly as before. Baby names and nursery plans were suddenly off the table, replaced by awkward silences or quick dismissals. Her warmth began to fade. She wasn't cruel or openly hostile, but there was a distance in her eyes, a coldness in her tone. Little comments started creeping in, about my appearance, my work habits, or my mood. At first, I brushed them off, telling myself she was just frustrated by the situation. But these weren't just passing remarks. They were small, cutting jabs that slowly chipped away at my confidence. I tried to talk to her about it, but she always dismissed my concerns, calling me overly sensitive. Despite these changes, I held on to hope. I believed in our love, our partnership. I thought we could weather this storm and come out stronger on the other side. Little did I know, the foundation of our marriage was already crumbling beneath my feet. From the beginning, having children was something we both seemed to agree on. It wasn't just a passing thought or a vague goal. It was something we talked about in vivid detail. She wanted 2 or 3 kids, while I leaned toward 2, thinking about the balance and stability we could provide. These conversations weren't just surface level. She'd get excited about every little thing. Picking names, debating which traits they might inherit, even scrolling through online stores for baby clothes and nursery furniture. For a while, planning for our future family was our shared language, something that brought us closer and kept us aligned. When we decided to start trying for a baby, we were optimistic. But as months passed with no success, a quiet tension began to grow. I could feel it in her unspoken frustration and in the hopeful glances we exchanged, trying to reassure each other. Eventually, we decided to seek medical advice, hoping for clarity. What we got instead was a devastating revelation. The problem was me. My infertility left us with little chance of conceiving naturally. Sitting in that sterile doctor's office, I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. She squeezed my hand and told me it didn't matter, that we'd figure it out together. But there was a hesitance in her voice, a flicker in her expression that hinted at something deeper, something I didn't want to acknowledge at the time. The days that followed were heavy with silence. I threw myself into work and distractions, hoping to avoid the suffocating guilt and inadequacy I felt. She, on the other hand, seemed to withdraw into herself. Conversations about children, once filled with excitement and hope, became awkward and fleeting. She avoided the topic entirely, brushing off my attempts to discuss alternatives like adoption or surrogacy. "Let's not think about that right now," she'd say, her tone flat and dismissive. But it wasn't just the conversations that changed. It was her. The woman who used to dream with me, who used to light up at the thought of our future, had started to seem distant, almost uninterested. I blamed myself entirely. I felt like I'd failed her, like I'd taken away the one thing she wanted most. No matter how much she assured me it wasn't my fault, her actions told a different story. The small criticisms about my habits, my appearance, my energy, each one felt like a dagger. I tried harder. I went to therapy, worked on myself, and even suggested taking a break from the baby discussions to focus on strengthening our relationship. But the more I tried to hold on, the more she seemed to slip away. We began living like strangers under the same roof. While I was still clinging to the hope that we could fix things, she was already pulling away. I could feel it in the way she avoided intimacy, the way her smiles stopped reaching her eyes. Looking back, the warning signs were all there. I just didn't want to see them. I convinced myself that it was just a rough patch, that we'd find our way back to each other. Little did I know, she'd already started to move on in her heart. Even if I hadn't. The shift in her demeanor wasn't immediate, but it was unmistakable. It started small, an unusual hesitance in her responses when I talked about the future, a lack of enthusiasm for the little traditions we used to share. The woman who once filled our home with warmth and laughter now seemed preoccupied, her thoughts always elsewhere. I remember the first time I felt it. We were sitting on the couch one evening, watching one of her favorite shows. I made a joke about something on screen, expecting her to laugh like she always did. Instead, she barely acknowledged it, her eyes glued to her phone. At first, I told myself it was stress. Maybe the weight of everything, the diagnosis, the unspoken disappointment, was just too much for her. I tried to be patient, to give her space. But the distance only grew wider. It wasn't just her silence that stung. Slowly, her words began to carry an edge they never had before. "You've been spending a lot of time on the couch lately," she'd say casually, though it felt like an accusation. "Or maybe you should think about getting back into shape." I'd never been one to shy away from self-improvement, but these comments weren't about encouragement. They felt like subtle digs, as though she were picking apart the very foundation of who I was. When I confronted her about it, she dismissed my concerns. "You're being too sensitive," she'd say, brushing it off like it was all in my head. But it wasn't. I could feel her pulling away, her affection replaced by a cold indifference that left me questioning everything. The nights were the hardest. Lying in bed next to her, I could feel the weight of the silence between us. She'd turn away as soon as the lights went out, her back to me, her breath steady and distant. I longed for the nights when we'd talk for hours, sharing dreams and secrets under the covers. Now, even holding her hand felt like a distant memory. I tried everything to bridge the gap. Romantic gestures, heartfelt conversations, even therapy. But no matter what I did, it felt like I was trying to hold on to someone who had already let go. What hurt the most was the lack of answers. She wouldn't talk about what she was feeling, wouldn't share the thoughts that were clearly weighing on her mind. Every time I brought it up, she'd change the subject or insist that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. I could see it in her eyes, hear it in the way her voice lacked the warmth it once held. The woman I had married, the one who used to dream with me, was slipping further and further away. Deep down, I was terrified. I didn't want to admit it. Not to myself and certainly not to her, but I was afraid of losing her. I thought that if I just tried hard enough, if I loved her enough, I could fix whatever was broken between us. But love, as I would come to learn, isn't always enough. And no matter how much I wanted to save our marriage, it was becoming painfully clear that she didn't feel the same. It seemed innocent enough at first. One evening, she mentioned wanting to take a girls' trip with her friends, a chance to unwind and recharge. She said they were planning to visit a new destination, somewhere she had always dreamed of seeing. This wasn't unusual. She'd gone on similar trips before, and I'd always supported her. After all, I trusted her. Trust was the foundation of our marriage, or so I thought. I even helped her pack, making sure she had everything she needed. She seemed unusually sentimental that evening, thanking me repeatedly for being so supportive. I remember her looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. At the time, I thought it was appreciation. In hindsight, it was probably guilt. The night she left, I stayed up late to call her once her flight landed. It was a long flight, so I busied myself with chores, TV, and checking my phone for updates. When I saw her flight had landed, I dialed her number. The phone rang and rang, but there was no answer. I reasoned that she might be tired from the journey or had gone straight to her hotel and fallen asleep. I told myself not to overthink it, but by the next morning, when I still hadn't heard from her, unease crept in. I called again, texted. Still nothing. By now, my concern had turned into a gnawing fear. Something wasn't right. Desperate for answers, I reached out to her sister, thinking she might have heard something. But she hadn't. Her family was just as in the dark as I was. I decided to call one of her closest friends, the one she'd mentioned as part of the trip. When her friend picked up, I expected some reassurance, maybe a simple, "Oh, she's fine. We're just busy." Instead, I was met with confusion. "What trip?" her friend asked, sounding genuinely puzzled. It hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't on a girls' trip. She wasn't with her friends at all. The realization came slowly, almost like my brain was trying to protect me from fully understanding what this meant. She was gone. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and in every other way that mattered. The woman I had spent years building a life with had orchestrated an elaborate lie to leave me behind. I couldn't understand why. Why hadn't she told me the truth? Why had she felt the need to fabricate this entire trip? My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Had she found someone else? Was she running from me, from our life, from the struggles we were supposed to face together? That night, I sat alone in our empty home, staring at my phone, waiting for a text or a call that would never come. My mind replayed our last moments together over and over. The way she had smiled, the way she had thanked me for my support. It all felt like a cruel joke. The next few days were a blur. I kept calling her phone, leaving messages that went unanswered. I even went to her parents' house, desperate for any clue about where she had gone. They were just as shocked and confused as I was. Her mother, a kind and empathetic woman, was devastated. She told me I was welcome to stay and talk anytime, but even she didn't have any answers. Her father, usually stoic, seemed uncomfortable, offering little more than, "I'm sure she'll come around." Those first nights were unbearable. Every creak in the house, every shadow in the hallway, felt like a reminder of her absence. I'd sit in the living room, staring at the door, half expecting her to walk back in and explain everything. But deep down, I knew she wasn't coming back. As the days turned into weeks, I began piecing together the subtle signs I had ignored. The growing distance, the coldness in her tone, the way she had avoided meaningful conversations. It all led to this moment. I realized she had been planning this for a long time. The girls' trip was just her way of making a clean break, of leaving without having to face the difficult conversations she didn't want to have. She had packed her bags and walked out of my life, leaving me with nothing but questions, and a gaping hole where our future used to be. When the truth finally sank in, it felt like I was living in someone else's nightmare. How could the woman I loved, the person I had built my life around, vanish without a word? She hadn't just left. She had meticulously planned her exit, lied to my face, and walked away as though our years together meant nothing. I sat in the silence of our home, replaying every moment from the past few months. The coldness in her words, her sudden disinterest in our plans, her constant preoccupation. It was all there, glaringly obvious now. But in my love, or maybe my naivety, I had refused to see it. That first night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed we once shared, staring at her empty side, hoping against hope that I'd wake up and find this was all a horrible dream. Grief hit me first, deep and unrelenting. I mourned the life we had built together, the dreams we had once shared. I missed the sound of her laughter, the warmth of her presence, even the mundane routine of sharing meals together. But grief didn't stay long. Quickly gave way to anger, an anger so fierce, it startled me. How dare she do this? How dare she take the life we had built, the love I had given, and toss it aside like it was worthless? Yet even the anger felt hollow at times. Beneath it lay guilt. I questioned myself constantly. Was it my fault? Was there something I could have done differently? Did I miss a chance to save our marriage, to make her stay? I turned to her family, hoping they might have answers. Her mother was kind, her concern genuine, but even she seemed blindsided by her daughter's actions. She didn't tell us anything, her mother said, her voice trembling. I don't know why she would do this. Her father, though less emotional, tried to reassure me. She'll reach out, he said. But I could tell he didn't believe his own words. My own family and friends offered their support, though their sympathy only magnified my pain. Their questions, why would she do this? And have you heard from her? Were ones I couldn't answer. Every inquiry felt like a reminder of my failure to keep her by my side. Eventually, I realized I couldn't navigate this alone. I started seeing a therapist, desperate for some clarity, some way to make sense of what had happened. In those sessions, I spilled everything. The betrayal, the guilt, the sleepless nights spent staring at my phone, hoping for a message that would never come. My therapist listened patiently, helping me unravel the tangled web of emotions I was trapped in. It's not your fault, she said more than once. Her choices are not a reflection of your worth. It was a hard truth to accept. For so long, I had carried the weight of our marriage on my shoulders, believing it was my responsibility to fix what was broken. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to see things differently. Nights were the worst. The silence in the house was deafening, every shadow a reminder of her absence. I tried distracting myself. TV, books, even cleaning, but nothing could fill the void she had left behind. There were moments when I wanted to reach out, to call her and beg for answers, for closure. But every time I stopped myself. Deep down, I knew she wasn't coming back. Despite the pain, I knew I couldn't stay in that dark place forever. Slowly, I started taking small steps forward. I went back to work, threw myself into my projects, and reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. But it wasn't just about staying busy. It was about finding pieces of myself that I had lost during our marriage. Pieces I didn't even realize were missing. The journey was far from over, but for the first time since she left, I felt a glimmer of hope. In the weeks that followed her disappearance, my life felt like it was running on autopilot. But one day something shifted. I woke up, looked at myself in the mirror, and decided that I couldn't let her choices define me anymore. If she had moved on, then so could I. Rebuilding my life started with small, deliberate steps. I picked up old hobbies that I had neglected over the years, things that had once brought me joy but had been lost in the routine of married life. Reading, cooking, and even hitting the gym became my anchors. The gym, in particular, became more than just a place to work out. It was a space where I could channel all the frustration, anger, and sadness that had been weighing me down. Each session left me feeling lighter, like I was slowly shedding the emotional baggage she had left behind. For years, I had allowed my marriage to overshadow my friendships. I didn't realize how much I had distanced myself from the people who cared about me until I reached out to them again. At first, I felt awkward, unsure of how to explain everything that had happened. But my friends surprised me with their support. They didn't pry or push me to talk about her unless I wanted to. Instead, they offered a safe space where I could just be myself. We started doing things I hadn't done in years. Hiking, going to games, even just grabbing drinks after work. It reminded me of who I was before the marriage, before the heartbreak. Work had always been important to me, but during my marriage, I had often prioritized her needs over my own ambitions. Now, I had the freedom to pour myself into my career without distractions. I took on challenging projects, worked late nights, and even started mentoring younger colleagues. The effort didn't go unnoticed. Within months, I was offered a promotion, a validation of my hard work and a reminder that I was capable of achieving great things on my own. One of the most surprising parts of rebuilding my life was how much I came to enjoy the little things. I started cooking new recipes, finding joy in experimenting with flavors and techniques. Meal prep became a ritual, something that grounded me in the present moment. Even mundane activities, like cleaning or organizing my home, took on a new significance. Each act felt like reclaiming a part of myself, a step toward creating a space that was truly mine. Of course, there were still moments of doubt and sadness. I'd come across an old photo or a random memory would surface, and for a split second the pain would return. But those moments grew fewer and farther between. Therapy helped me understand that letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant accepting what had happened and choosing to move forward despite it. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living for myself. My days were no longer dictated by someone else's needs or expectations. I was learning to trust myself again, to believe that I could build a fulfilling life on my own terms. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but piece by piece, I was reclaiming my happiness. And that, I realized, was the best revenge I could ever have. Not anger, not bitterness, but the quiet peace of a life well lived. It was an ordinary Saturday morning. The sun was streaming through the windows as I brewed my coffee and planned my day. Life had finally settled into a comfortable rhythm, and I was proud of how far I'd come since she left. Then came the knock. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I assumed it was a delivery or a neighbor. When I opened the door, I froze. There she was, standing on my doorstep, holding a baby in her arms. It was as if the years had collapsed in an instant, and I was staring at a ghost from my past. She looked almost the same, just a little older, a little more worn down. Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought she might apologize, explain, or even cry. Instead, she smiled, as if she truly believed I'd be happy to see her. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice calm, almost casual, as though she had merely been gone for the weekend and not years. Everything inside me screamed to shut the door, but curiosity won out. I didn't let her in, though. I stepped outside instead, closing the door behind me. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my tone as steady as I could manage. She started talking, her words tumbling out in a rehearsed, almost desperate rush. She admitted she had left because she wanted a child, something I couldn't give her. She said she had met someone else, someone who could. But things hadn't worked out. The man she had run off with had left her, and now she was back, with a baby in tow. "This is our second chance," she said, looking down at the child in her arms. I realized I made a mistake. I shouldn't have left. "I want us to be a family." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity of her words. Did she really think she could waltz back into my life as if nothing had happened? Did she honestly believe that I would forgive her betrayal, forget the pain she had caused, and raise another man's child as my own? "Why now?" I asked, my voice tinged with anger I could no longer suppress. "Why come back after all this time?" She hesitated, looking down at her feet. "Because I realized what I lost," she said finally. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I know I hurt you, but I've changed. I'm ready to make things work." Her words might have once melted my resolve, but not anymore. I had spent too many nights grieving her loss, too many days rebuilding my life from the ashes she left behind. Now, her pleas felt hollow, her tears manipulative. "You didn't lose me," I said coldly. "You threw me away. And now you think you can just show up and expect me to pick up the pieces." She started crying, her voice trembling as she begged me to reconsider. She said she had been scared, that she didn't know how to handle the disappointment of our situation. She claimed she had realized her mistake too late, but wanted to make it right. But for me, it wasn't about her regret anymore. It was about self-respect. I told her no. No to her apologies. No to her explanations. And no to the second chance she so desperately wanted. I reminded her of the pain she caused, the years she stole from me, and the trust she shattered. You made your choice, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. And now you have to live with it. I've moved on. You're not part of my life anymore. Her expression shifted from sorrow to anger, and she accused me of being selfish, of not giving her the chance to make things right. She even had the nerve to suggest that the house, the one I had worked so hard to rebuild in her absence, should still be hers. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply said, "We're done," and shut the door in her face. As I stood in the quiet of my home, listening to her muffled protests from the other side of the door, a strange sense of peace washed over me. This was closure, not the kind I had imagined, but the kind I needed. She had made her choice years ago, and now I was making mine. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind of morning I had come to cherish, calm, simple, predictable. Coffee brewing, sunlight spilling through the windows, and the reassuring hum of normalcy. Then came the knock on the door. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe a delivery, a neighbor stopping by. But when I opened the door, the air was sucked from my lungs. There she was, my wife, or rather, the woman who used to be my wife. She looked almost the same, just a little older, a little more worn down. But she wasn't alone. In her arms was a baby. She smiled, as if she truly believed I would welcome her back, as if the years of silence and betrayal could be erased with a single look. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. I stared at her, my mind racing. A flood of emotions hit me. Shock, anger, confusion, and, strangely, pity. I didn't say anything at first. How could I? After everything she had done, after all the pain she had caused, she was standing there like she had every right to be. "I think you should explain yourself right here," I said finally, stepping out onto the porch and closing the door behind me. I wasn't about to let her step back into the home I had rebuilt without her. She hesitated, her eyes darting between me and the baby. Then, with a deep breath, she began to speak. She admitted that she had left because she wanted a child, something I couldn't give her. She had met someone else, someone who could, and she had chosen him over me. But, as she put it, things didn't work out. The man she had run off with had abandoned her, leaving her to raise the child alone. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I hurt you, but I want us to be a family. This baby is our second chance." I stared at her in disbelief. A second chance? Was she serious? Did she really think she could walk back into my life, holding another man's child, and expect me to forgive her? "Why now?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "Why come back after all this time?" She looked down at her feet, then back at me. "Because I realized what I lost," she said. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I know I was wrong, but I'm here to make it right." Her words might have worked on the man I used to be, the man who loved her, trusted her, and would have done anything to save our marriage. But I wasn't that man anymore. "You didn't lose me," I said coldly. "You threw me away. And now you think you can just show up, baby in tow, and expect me to forget everything? To forgive you?" She started crying, her tears falling fast as she begged me to reconsider. She said she was scared, that she had been overwhelmed by the situation and made a terrible mistake. She claimed she had spent every day since regretting her decision, but it didn't matter anymore. "You made your choice," I said, cutting her off. "And now you have to live with it. I've moved on. You're not part of my life anymore." Her tears turned to anger. She accused me of being selfish, of not giving her the chance to make things right. She even suggested that the house, the one I had worked so hard to rebuild in her absence, should still belong to her. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply said, "We're done," and shut the door in her face. As I stood inside, listening to her muffled protests fade away, a strange calm washed over me. This was closure. Not the kind I had imagined, but the kind I needed. She had made her choice years ago, and now I had made mine. When I shut the door on her, I thought that would be the end of it. I figured she'd leave, realizing there was no way back into my life. But I underestimated her determination, or perhaps her desperation. Within minutes, she was pounding on the door again, yelling for me to listen. Her voice cracked as she alternated between begging and demanding, accusing and pleading. "You can't do this to me," she shouted. "You owe me a chance to explain." I stood in the hallway, listening to her muffled cries, my chest tight with a mix of anger and pity. But I refused to let her back in. She'd already taken so much from me. I wasn't about to let her steal my peace. The banging didn't stop. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door just a crack, enough to show her I was listening but not enough to invite her inside. Her expression was a mix of desperation and frustration. She launched into a tirade about how she had been willing to forgive me for shutting her out, how she was ready to work on us. It was as if she had rewritten history in her mind, painting herself as the victim of my rejection rather than the architect of her own betrayal. "You don't understand how hard it's been for me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I had no one. I thought of you every day, wishing I could turn back time." Her words might have stirred some old feelings in the past, but now they felt hollow. This wasn't about love or regret. It was about convenience. She wanted to use me as her safety net, and I wasn't going to let that happen. "You made your choice," I said firmly, cutting her off mid-sentence. "You planned this, lied to me, and left. And now, because your plan didn't work out, you think you can just come back like nothing happened? That's not how it works." Her face twisted with anger, and she dropped the facade of sorrow. "You're being selfish," she snapped. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me? You could never give me what I wanted, and I had to make a choice. But I'm here now trying to fix things. You should be grateful." Grateful. The word echoed in my mind, sparking a wave of incredulity. "Grateful?" I said, my voice calm but laced with steel. "You lied, cheated, and abandoned me. And now you think I owe you something? No, you're on your own." As I spoke, her anger boiled over. She lashed out, accusing me of being a failure, of driving her to leave in the first place. She even brought up the house, claiming it should still be hers because we built this life together. It was in that moment I saw her for who she truly was. Someone who couldn't take responsibility for her own actions. Her words didn't sting like they might have before. They only solidified my resolve. "I built this life after you destroyed it," I said, meeting her glare with steady eyes. "You're not entitled to any of it. You chose to walk away, and now you have to live with that choice." For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me, her expression shifting from anger to something resembling regret. But I wasn't moved. I had spent too many nights grieving, too many days putting myself back together, to let her undo it all with empty words and tears. When it became clear I wasn't going to budge, she turned and walked away, muttering under her breath. I watched her go, the baby still in her arms, and felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. As I closed the door for the final time, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. This wasn't just the end of her attempts to re-enter my life. It was the end of her power over me. She had once consumed my every thought, but now, she was just a chapter in my past. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. In the days that followed her dramatic return, I heard snippets of her life from mutual acquaintances and, occasionally, her own family. She hadn't left quietly, of course not. But what struck me most was how quickly the illusion of her control unraveled once the door had closed on her, both literally and figuratively. Her once pristine image was now riddled with cracks, and those around her started seeing the truth. The man she had left me for, the supposed answer to her dreams of motherhood, had disappeared from her life just as swiftly as he had entered it. He had no interest in raising the child they'd created and had left her to shoulder the responsibility alone. With nowhere else to go, she returned to her parents' home. It wasn't the triumphant return she had imagined when she left me. Her family, supportive as they tried to be, was in no position to offer her the life she had abandoned me to find. Her mother, a kind-hearted woman, reached out to me in a strained text, apologizing for her daughter's behavior. "She's struggling," she said, almost pleading on her behalf. "She's lost and needs support." Her father, however, wasn't as subtle. A few days later, I received a call from him. He was polite, but there was an unmistakable edge of desperation in his voice. He hinted that they were struggling financially and suggested that I might consider helping out. For the baby's sake, I listened, maintaining a calm exterior, and firmly declined. "I understand this is hard," I said, "but her choices are her own. I've moved on, and I'm not in a position to get involved." Her friends, once loyal and supportive, had grown distant. Many of them had stood by me when she left, unable to condone the way she had treated me. When she returned, trying to rekindle old friendships, they weren't as eager to welcome her back. I heard through the grapevine that she had started leaning on acquaintances, asking for help wherever she could find it. But sympathy wasn't as abundant as she had hoped. She had burned too many bridges, and people weren't willing to let her mistakes drag them down. With every failed attempt to rebuild her old life, her situation worsened. She struggled to hold down a job, juggling the demands of single motherhood with an increasingly fragile mental state. The financial strain became evident when mutual friends mentioned she had started selling off belongings, even furniture, just to make ends meet. Her desperation became public knowledge in small circles. People whispered about her, pitying her plight but unwilling to extend a hand. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. I'd be lying if I said I felt no sympathy for her. Watching someone fall apart, even someone who hurt you deeply, isn't easy. But my sympathy didn't translate into action. Every time someone tried to guilt me into helping her, I reminded myself of the nights I had spent alone, the years I had spent rebuilding my life, and the strength it had taken to move on. She had made her decisions, and I had made mine. The last I heard, she was still bouncing between her parents' home and various friends' couches, trying to make it work. The man she had left me for was long gone, leaving her to face the reality of single motherhood without support. For me, her downfall wasn't something I celebrated, but it was a clear reminder that actions have consequences. She had walked away from the life we built together, and now she was paying the price. Closing the door on her for the final time wasn't just an act of rejection. It was the culmination of a journey that had taken years to complete. It was the moment I fully realized that her choices no longer defined me. I wasn't the man she had abandoned, nor was I the man she could manipulate into forgiving her. In the days that followed, I felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. There was no lingering doubt, no second-guessing my decision. I had spent too long rebuilding myself to let her tear it all down again. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my life. Life didn't change overnight, but it evolved in a way that felt natural and freeing. My routine, one that I had built piece by piece in her absence, was no longer something I clung to out of necessity. It became a source of genuine joy and fulfillment. Work, which had once been a refuge from my pain, was now a place where I thrived. The promotion I had earned months earlier became a stepping stone for even greater achievements. With no distractions or emotional baggage holding me back, I poured my energy into excelling in my field. Outside of work, my personal life blossomed. The friends I had reconnected with became a strong support system, and our outings were no longer an escape. They were a celebration of the life I was rebuilding. Occasionally, memories of her would surface. A song we used to listen to, an old photo tucked away in a forgotten drawer, a random thought about what might have been. But those moments no longer held the power they once did. Instead of sadness, they brought a sense of closure. I didn't regret the years we spent together, nor did I wish to erase them. They were a part of my story, a chapter that had shaped me in ways I couldn't have foreseen. But they were also in the past, and that's where they would stay. Happiness, I discovered, wasn't some grand, elusive achievement. It was found in the small moments, the quiet satisfaction of a home-cooked meal, the laughter shared with friends, the peace of a quiet evening alone. I no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone, least of all her. The life I was living was mine, built on my terms and filled with the kind of peace and contentment I once thought I'd never find again. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that resilience isn't about bouncing back quickly or pretending the pain doesn't exist. It's about facing the pain head-on, accepting what you can't change, and choosing to move forward anyway. Her choices shaped her life and mine shaped mine. While she was stuck in the wreckage of her decisions, I was free to move forward, stronger and more self-assured than ever. And now it's your turn. Take the lessons, take the strength, and take the first step toward reclaiming your happiness. Remember, this community is here for you. Together, we'll share, learn, and rise above whatever life throws our way. Thank you for watching Unheard Stories. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and never settle for less than you deserve.